What were you doing when you got fired because of AI? Part 1. I'm a graphic designer, and I'd say I got laid off indirectly because of AI. Not because AI replaced my skills, not because my work became obsolete overnight, but because the person managing me fundamentally did not understand design, and AI gave her the confidence to believe she didn't need to. My manager wasn't a designer. She didn't know the difference between RGB and CMYK, or why you can't just send any digital image straight to print and expect it to work. Vector versus raster meant nothing to her. Layers, file formats, bleed, resolution, all of it might as well have been magic spells. She genuinely had no idea how any of it functioned. But like so many people in leadership right now, she was absolutely dazzled by what AI can do. Every single day, she asked me why I wasn't using AI to complete my tasks. Not occasionally, not as a suggestion. Daily, as if AI were a magic button I was stubbornly refusing to press. When I tried to explain that AI tools weren't suitable for many of the things we were doing, or that they still required a trained eye to fix, adapt, and make production ready, it didn't matter. To her, my hesitation wasn't professional judgment. It was resistance. At one point, she outright told me that my refusal to use AI was a problem, that I wasn't being flexible, that I wasn't embracing the future. Shortly after that, I was included in the next round of company-wide layoffs. That was 6 months ago. Since then, nothing visual gets done anymore. Sure, occasionally a social media post goes out, usually built from one of the templates I created before I left. But beyond that, no new website visuals, no updated image assets, no downloadable PDFs, no refreshed branding materials, no campaigns, no iteration, just stagnation. The website looks exactly the same. The visuals are frozen in time. Any task that requires actual design thinking, adapting assets, creating something new, solving visual problems, simply doesn't happen. And this is the part that really matters. AI didn't replace a designer. It replaced the illusion of understanding. When someone who doesn't know how design works believes AI can just do it, they stop valuing the invisible labor, the decisions, the experience, the problem-solving that make visual work functional, accessible, and effective. They don't see what's missing until months later, when nothing is moving forward and they don't know why. AI can generate images. It can assist. It can speed up certain workflows, but it doesn't understand brand systems, production constraints, accessibility, consistency, or long-term strategy. And it definitely doesn't know how to fix things when something breaks, which is where real designers earn their value. What happened to me wasn't innovation. It was overconfidence paired with ignorance. And now the company has exactly what they chose. No designer, no progress, and no one who actually knows how to turn what AI can do into something that works in the real world. Senior developer at a big tech company here. I wasn't laid off because AI replaced my job. I was laid off because of AI spending. The company poured an enormous amount of money into AI initiatives. Infrastructure, tooling, vendors, consultants, you name it. The bills got very real, very fast. And once those costs hit the balance sheet, something else had to give. That something was people. Officially, the narrative was that AI would increase efficiency, reduce duplication, and eventually replace certain roles, so layoffs were framed as a proactive business decision. Whether that's actually true or just a convenient justification to cut headcount after overspending is very much up for debate. What makes it more frustrating is how selectively that logic was applied. I was the only person on my team laid off. I had strong performance reviews, no warnings, no performance improvement plans, just gone. Looking at the broader pattern, and frankly my LinkedIn feed confirms this, it's pretty clear what the real selection criteria was: people who haven't been promoted in a while and are at the top of their pay band for their role. In other words, expensive, experienced developers, which completely undercuts the claim that AI is doing the work now. Because if AI were actually replacing engineering labor in any meaningful way, they wouldn't be laying off senior developers. They'd be laying off junior ones. Senior engineers aren't paid more because they type faster. They're paid because they design systems, anticipate failures, mentor others, make architectural decisions, and clean up the mess when things go sideways, including the messes created by AI-generated code. If AI were truly capable of replacing engineers, the logical move would be to keep the seniors and trim the juniors. Instead, what happened was the opposite. Cut the people with the highest salaries and the deepest institutional knowledge while publicly claiming it's about the future of work. There's also a not-so-small suspicion that AI may have even been used to help identify who to lay off. Whether that's true or not, the criteria certainly feels algorithmic. Tenure without recent promotion, compensation ceiling reached, high cost relative to role title. So no, this wasn't AI outperforming me. This was AI becoming a budget line item so large that the company needed layoffs to justify it, paired with a story about automation that sounds good to shareholders, even if it doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Time will tell how well that strategy works. But cutting senior engineers while betting everything on tools that still require senior engineers to function correctly feels less like innovation and more like accounting dressed up as progress. I work in heavy industry, specifically rail, as a technical writer. As of right now, I'm still employed, which I'm grateful for, but I'd be lying if I said I felt confident about what the next few years look like. Upper management has already experimented with using AI to generate maintenance documentation, procedures, and technical guides. On paper, it probably looks impressive. Fast output, clean formatting, confident language. But in practice, it's a minefield. The biggest issue is hallucination. The AI will confidently reference components, systems, switches, or controls that do not exist on the actual equipment, not typos, not minor inaccuracies, entire imaginary parts. And in an industry like rail, that isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous. The people using these documents are not engineers. They're technicians, operators, and maintenance crews who rely on clear, precise, step-by-step instructions to do their jobs safely. If a document tells them to check a control that isn't there, or follow a procedure based on a fictional component, it creates confusion at best and serious safety risks at worst. This isn't software documentation where a bug means an app crashes. These are physical systems, heavy machinery, moving equipment, real-world consequences. What's especially unsettling is how confident the AI sounds while being wrong. It doesn't hedge, it doesn't say this may vary or verify with engineering. It just states things as fact. That false authority is incredibly dangerous when documentation is meant to be trusted implicitly. Right now, the only thing preventing real harm is the human layer. People like me and my colleagues catching errors, cross-referencing schematics, verifying against actual equipment, and pushing back when something doesn't align with reality. But I honestly don't know how long management plans to keep that safeguard in place. There's a growing sense that leadership views human review as a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent necessity. As if the goal is hands-off documentation someday. Press a button, generate manuals, ship them out. That idea is terrifying. Because until AI can reliably understand physical systems, real-world constraints, edge cases, and the responsibility that comes with writing instructions, people stake their safety on. It absolutely cannot be trusted to operate unsupervised. AI can be a tool, a drafting assistant, a starting point, maybe. But the thought of safety-critical documentation being generated and published without a human who understands the equipment, the risks, and the consequences? That's not innovation. That's gambling with people's lives. And the fact that this is even being seriously considered tells me the future of this field won't be decided by what AI can do, but by how much risk leadership is willing to tolerate in the name of efficiency. I've been a self-employed voice actor and speech coach for the past 10 years. Until recently, it was a stable, sustainable career built on skill, experience, and long-term client relationships. Today, my income is down more than 70%, and the drop wasn't gradual. It was sudden, sharp, and directly tied to the rapid adoption of AI. The most immediate hit came from companies replacing professional narration with AI voices for internal content. Training videos, onboarding materials, explainer videos, the kind of bread and butter work that kept many voice actors afloat, are now being generated in minutes with synthetic voices. These aren't projects that moved overseas or evolved creatively. They simply vanished. What's especially frustrating is that this isn't about quality. Many of these AI narrations are flat, awkward, or subtly wrong in ways a trained human would never deliver. But because the videos are in-house, companies no longer care. Good enough is good enough, especially when it's cheap, fast, and doesn't require coordination with another human being. The second blow came from private individuals and small businesses. Instead of hiring a coach to improve their speaking, presentation, or confidence on camera, many are now using AI clones of their own voices to present for them. Rather than learning how to communicate more effectively, which was the entire point of my coaching work, they bypass the skill entirely. In other words, people aren't just outsourcing performance, they're outsourcing growth. That shift has quietly erased a huge portion of what used to be meaningful, human-centered work. Teaching someone how to speak clearly, confidently, and authentically isn't just about sound, it's about presence, credibility, and connection. AI doesn't develop those skills, it replaces them and leaves the person exactly where they started. The final hit was the most demoralizing. My textbooks, materials I spent years developing, refining, and teaching from, were effectively stolen. They were scraped, rewritten by AI content mills, and repackaged as low-effort guides and courses. The result? My book sales dropped from £400 and £600 a month to £80 or £100, almost overnight. There was no credit, no permission, no compensation, just automated plagiarism at scale. And the worst part is how normalized this has become. It's not framed as theft, it's framed as innovation. The burden is quietly placed on creators to compete with systems trained on their own work, systems that can churn out infinite variations while the original author watches their livelihood evaporate. At this point, I'm actively looking for a job or trying to come up with an entirely new business idea. Not because I failed, not because my work lost value, but because the ground shifted underneath an entire profession faster than anyone was prepared for. This isn't a story about refusing to adapt. I've adapted my entire career. It's about what happens when technology isn't used to assist human skill, but to erase it. And when the people affected are expected to quietly accept that loss as progress. I don't know what the next chapter looks like yet. I just know that 10 years of expertise didn't disappear because it stopped being useful. It disappeared because someone figured out how to simulate it cheaply without regard for the humans who built it in the first place. I'm a software engineer. I left my job for parental leave, excited, exhausted, and focused on keeping a tiny new human alive. When I came back, my entire team was gone. Not reassigned, not reorganized. Fired, along with most of the floor I worked on. A few days later, my former boss's boss scheduled a meeting for 4 days out. No context, no reassurance, just a calendar invite hanging over my head while I tried to process the reality that everything familiar about my job had vanished while I was gone. Technically, they did the right thing. They kept me employed through my leave. On paper, Everything was compliant. But there's something deeply soulless about wiping out someone's entire professional world right after they've had a newborn. It sends a very clear message about how disposable people are, even at the most vulnerable moments of their lives. I spent the rest of that year as a stay-at-home dad, submitting applications during nap times, studying for certifications late at night, and trying to stay hopeful. I made it to 6 final interview rounds. 6. Every time, I received glowing feedback. Strong culture fit, excellent technical skills, great communication, and every time, the answer was still no. After a while, you start to feel like you're running a marathon where the finish line keeps quietly moving. Eventually, I made a decision that surprised even me. I went back to school. I'm currently taking prerequisites for a master's degree in bioinformatics. It's a pivot, and it's not a small one. There's a very real chance that by the time I'm done, AI will have reshaped that field too. I'm not naive about that risk. But here's the thing. I've spent a decade building software for companies that, at the end of the day, weren't actually making the world better. They were optimizing engagement, extracting a little more profit, squeezing a little more value out of users who didn't ask for it. The work was technically challenging, sure, but the mission was hollow. And after everything that happened, that hollowness became impossible to ignore. I don't want to spend the rest of my career helping companies figure out how to monetize people more efficiently. I want to do research. I want to contribute to something that actually improves lives, advances knowledge, or solves real problems, even if that path is harder, slower, and less lucrative. Maybe that's idealistic. Maybe it's risky. Maybe I'll look back and wonder if I made the wrong call. But after watching how easily entire teams can be erased, how quickly loyalty evaporates, and how little human context matters when budgets get tight, I'd rather take a chance on work that feels meaningful than keep chasing stability that doesn't actually exist. I don't know exactly where this road leads. I just know that I'm done pouring my energy into systems that don't care who gets burned along the way. I want to try, genuinely try, to make the world better, even if the odds aren't guaranteed. And for the first time in a long while, that feels worth the uncertainty. It's not dead yet, but it's clearly entering its swan song, teaching English abroad, at least in the traditional, physical sense. The first real crack appeared with Zoom. Almost overnight, many of us were replaced by teachers working remotely from cheaper markets, delivering the same lessons at a fraction of the cost. Schools realized they could keep the product while cutting out the expense of visas, housing stipends, and on-the-ground staff. What once required a human presence suddenly didn't. Now, AI is accelerating that shift even further. With automated lesson plans, instant feedback, pronunciation tools, and conversational bots that never get tired or need a day off, fewer students and fewer institutions see the need for a full-time human teacher. At best, we are increasingly relegated to occasional conversation practice, a kind of linguistic garnish rather than the main course. The role has been hollowed out, piece by piece, until what remains barely resembles the career it once was. At this point, I'm essentially staring down a career change. And honestly, that's okay. I had a genuinely great run. I enjoyed the work, the students, and the experience of living in places I might never have seen otherwise. I was privileged to make a living simply by speaking a globally valued language, and lucky enough to do it during a window of time when demand was high and competition was manageable. Right time, right place. And I don't take that lightly. Not every career gets to end with gratitude instead of bitterness. That doesn't mean there's no apprehension, of course. Starting over always comes with uncertainty, especially when the rules of the job market are shifting so quickly. It's hard not to wonder what skills will still matter in 5 or 10 years, or how many other safe professions are quietly heading down the same path. But who isn't a little uneasy right now? All good things eventually come to an end. This one just happens to be ending in a way that reflects a much larger transition happening everywhere at once. I don't know exactly what comes next, but I do know that I'm leaving this chapter without regret. and that in itself feels like a rare kind of luck. I've worn a lot of professional hats over the years, and across nearly all of them, the drop-off has been brutal. As a photographer and model, both behind and in front of the camera, my work is down about 90%. I primarily shot exclusive stock images for book covers, a niche that once relied heavily on skilled, human-created visuals. Now, between AI-generated imagery and tighter budgets, that market has almost completely evaporated. As a designer, client work has dropped roughly 80%. One former client said the quiet part out loud. "We can do this ourselves, and don't plan on hiring middlemen anymore." The implication wasn't that the results would be better, just cheaper and fast enough to pass. As a writer, I scaled back years ago, but many colleagues who built entire careers around publishing are seeing sales shrink dramatically. Between AI-generated filler content flooding marketplaces and people simply having less discretionary income, even established names are struggling to maintain traction. In fitness, I've watched clients cut back on personal training altogether. Instead, they're leaning on GPT-style tools for workout plans, nutrition advice, and accountability. It's not personalized, it's not always correct. But for many, it's good enough. And that phrase, good enough, is the thread running through all of it. What I'm seeing across industries isn't just automation, and it's not just AI. It's a broad shift toward DIY survival mode. People are under financial pressure, so they're trimming anything that feels optional. Third-party services, creatives, consultants, specialists, are often the first to go. Even when the quality clearly drops, the savings feel more important in the moment. The bar hasn't been raised, it's been lowered. We're moving into an era where acceptable beats excellent, where speed and cost outweigh craft, and where expertise is increasingly treated as a luxury rather than a necessity. AI didn't create that mindset. It just made it easier to justify. What's unsettling isn't that people are choosing cheaper tools. It's how quickly entire professions are being reframed as expendable once a shortcut exists, regardless of the long-term cost to quality, safety, or originality. This doesn't feel like a temporary dip. It feels like a structural shift. And for a lot of us, the challenge now isn't just adapting to new tools, it's figuring out where human skill still holds value in a world that's increasingly comfortable settling for close enough. I wasn't laid off myself, but several people on my team were, directly because of AI. I'm a compliance officer at a company that works primarily with business utilities. A huge part of my role is listening to sales calls and reviewing them for legal and regulatory compliance. It's not glamorous work, but it's critical. These calls are how we protect the company from fines, lawsuits, and regulatory action. Miss something important, and the consequences can be severe. Management decided this was the perfect area to optimize with AI. On paper, it made sense. An AI system could listen to far more calls than a team of 20 people ever could. It wouldn't get tired, it wouldn't miss shifts, it would flag issues automatically and free us up to focus on higher-level compliance work. Based on that promise, 5 people on my team were laid off in anticipation that we simply wouldn't need them anymore. That was 6 months ago. The reality has been disastrous. The AI is woefully unreliable. It's constantly delayed, struggles with context, misinterprets nuance, and regularly flags harmless conversations while missing genuinely problematic ones. Accents, background noise, overlapping speech, sarcasm, all the things humans can easily navigate, completely derail it. Instead of streamlining our work, it's created a second layer of problems we now have to babysit. And because those 5 people are gone, there's no buffer. So now we have fewer humans doing more work than before. We're still expected to manually review calls because the AI can't be trusted on its own, and we're supposed to take on the other areas of the business that automation was supposed to free us up for. The workload didn't disappear. It just got compressed onto a smaller group of people. Burnout is real, and it's escalating. What's frustrating is that leadership still treats this like a temporary adjustment period, as if the system just needs more time to learn. But the damage is already done. Institutional knowledge walked out the door. The safety net is gone, and the people left are stretched thinner every month, trying to compensate for technology that was oversold and underdelivered. AI wasn't used here to support human judgment. It was used to replace it prematurely. And instead of efficiency, what we got was risk, stress, and a workforce that's quietly fraying at the edges. The irony is hard to miss. In a role specifically designed to reduce legal and operational risk, the rush to automate has done the exact opposite. I wasn't laid off by AI. I helped build the system that replaced people. The job we were automating was large-scale data entry. Hundreds of people, manually inputting structured information. It was repetitive, tedious, and expensive, but it was also necessary. You couldn't skip it, because without that data, nothing else downstream worked. The approach wasn't a dramatic, replace everyone with a machine moment. It was gradual, methodical, almost boring. First, we hired a massive data entry workforce and gathered enough high-quality examples to train a system to fill in some of the blanks automatically. Not all of them, just some. When the system could reliably handle a portion of the work, we needed fewer people doing manual entry. Then we fed the system more data, improved it, raised the bar, reduced the human workload again. Rinse and repeat. Over time, only the hardest cases remained. The edge cases, the ambiguous inputs, the situations where human judgment really mattered. And only the best data entry workers were still needed to handle them. But here's the part that tends to get glossed over in today's AI hype cycles. Quality control was everything. We had strict targets, 98% accuracy or better. That wasn't negotiable. Hitting that threshold required a robust, ongoing QA program staffed by humans who deeply understood both the domain and the system's failure modes. The AI didn't just run. It was constantly audited, corrected, retrained, and constrained. Without that QA layer, the whole system would have been dangerous. This type of system isn't new. It's what's traditionally called an expert system. Variations of it have been around for decades. The difference today isn't the concept. It's the scale, the speed, and the willingness to deploy systems without the guardrails we used to consider mandatory. And that's where my concern lies when I look at modern AI deployments. In my personal life, I've also fired people, not directly but functionally, using AI and the internet. I Google symptoms before seeing a doctor. I troubleshoot appliances before calling a repair tech. I look up car issues before going to a mechanic. Every time I do that, a little bit of work that once went to a professional doesn't. This erosion isn't new either. What's new is how frictionless it's become. Recently, I've started using tools like Claude to answer financial and investment questions, not because I distrust professionals, but because it's faster, cheaper, and available instantly. That means fewer questions routed to educators, fewer consultations with financial planners, less billable time overall. My individual impact is tiny, but there are millions of people like me, and these are high-touch professions. When even a small percentage of work disappears, the effect is disproportionate. Lose 10% of tasks, and you don't just lose 10% of income, you lose justification for roles, headcount, and entire career paths. What's happening isn't a clean AI replaced humans story. It's subtler than that. It's the slow draining away of work, the quiet shrinking of demand, the gradual realization that good enough answers, delivered cheaply and instantly, are acceptable to most people most of the time. That's the real disruption. And unlike earlier waves of automation, many of today's systems are being deployed without the rigorous quality controls that made previous expert systems safe and trustworthy. The absence of strong QA isn't just a technical oversight. It's a structural risk, both to businesses and to the people affected by their decisions. AI doesn't have to be catastrophic to be destructive. It only has to be convenient. I actually think you're pushing back on the right part of the narrative. Not AI exists, but the wildly inflated claims about what it is and what it can safely replace. You're absolutely right about a few core things that get glossed over. First, AI does not think. It doesn't reason, understand, or evaluate truth. It predicts tokens based on patterns in data. That distinction matters a lot, because people keep anthropomorphizing it and then acting shocked when it behaves exactly like a statistical parrot. Calling it intelligence was a branding decision, not a technical one. Second, the data problem is real and getting worse. These systems are trained on massive datasets scraped from the internet, which already contained misinformation, bias, trolling, and outright lies before AI entered the picture. Now we're in a feedback loop where AI-generated content is being indexed, scraped, summarized, and then fed back into future models. That's not learning. That's incestuous noise amplification. The AI slop issue you mentioned is critical. Once models start training on their own output, or the output of similar models, you get degradation, not improvement. Errors don't cancel out, they compound. Subtle inaccuracies become facts, edge cases become norms, and confidence stays high even as correctness drops. That's a nightmare scenario in any domain where accuracy actually matters. Third, you nailed the augmentation versus replacement distinction. AI works best when a trained human is in the loop. The human understands the domain well enough to spot hallucinations. The AI is used to speed up boring, repetitive, or low-risk tasks. It works worst when management treats it as a drop-in replacement. There's no QA layer. The output is trusted by default instead of verified. That's not a theoretical concern. We're already seeing it in medicine, law, compliance, safety documentation, journalism, and education. Anywhere mistakes have consequences, fully hands-off AI is not just bad, it's dangerous. And honestly, I agree with your last point more than people are comfortable admitting. I'm kinda glad it fails. Same. Because right now, AI's failures are one of the few things slowing down a full-blown corporate race to the bottom. If these systems actually worked as advertised, we'd see an even faster erosion of worker protections, professional standards, and accountability. The fact that they hallucinate, contradict themselves, and require constant supervision is, paradoxically, a brake on unchecked greed. The real problem isn't AI as a tool, it's AI as an excuse to cut headcount, an excuse to ignore expertise, an excuse to pretend complex human judgment is just a pattern-matching problem. Used responsibly, AI can absolutely make people more productive. Used irresponsibly, it just launders bad decisions through an algorithm and gives leadership plausible deniability when things go wrong. So yeah, your skepticism isn't anti-technology, it's pro-reality. In one of my business classes in college, we had a semester-long project that simulated running a company. Each week, we had to make strategic decisions, but 2 of the weeks were particularly eye-opening. We were given a massive, detailed document with about 50 employees listed, each tagged with multiple factors: performance reviews, productivity metrics, criticality to the business, and most prominently, their salaries. The employees were sorted by job family and name, but the first thing you saw, right at the top of the columns, was their pay. It was shocking how quickly the exercise forced us to make life-altering decisions, at least in theory, about these people simply because it had been reduced to numbers in a spreadsheet. That extra executive making $325,000 a year? Everyone immediately chose them as the easiest target. Without hesitation, every single person in the class cut that salary first. It felt almost mechanical, like we were all trained to just see the biggest numbers as expendable costs. Where the project got interesting, though, was in the details, or, as they say, in the weeds. Most of my classmates stayed at that surface level, cutting the highest-paid employees and calling it a day. I'd estimate about 95% of the class went that route. But having spent some time working with real teams, I knew that human capital isn't just a line on a spreadsheet. Experienced employees carry institutional knowledge, mentor others, and often have productivity that far outpaces a newer hire. Simply cutting the highest salaries could create real operational problems, even in a simulated environment. So I dug deeper. I looked beyond the pay scale. How productive was this employee compared to their peers? What did their team reviews say about them? How quickly did their department ramp up new staff under their leadership? These qualitative factors mattered just as much as the quantitative ones. By factoring those things in, I ended up making very different choices than the majority of the class. Several middle-of-the-pack employees, who might have seemed expendable at first glance, stayed because their contributions were vital. Meanwhile, some newer hires, less experienced but paid competitively, were let go. In the end, I retained most of the senior staff while still meeting the budget I was assigned. The takeaway hit me hard. On paper, these are just numbers. But behind each line is a human life, a career, and a web of relationships and influence that a simple calculation doesn't capture. By the end of the exercise, my decisions had cut over $1 million in salaries and resulted in the theoretical loss of 10 to 15 jobs. It was a wake-up call about how easy it is for people in positions of authority to make snap, superficial decisions when all they see is a spreadsheet. It also taught me a subtle but crucial lesson about leadership and decision-making. Never underestimate the importance of context and institutional knowledge. Someone who looks like an expensive problem on paper might actually be the glue holding your team together. And conversely, someone who seems like a small player might be expendable. Numbers don't lie, but they also don't tell the full story. Even now, years later, I think about that exercise every time I see a report or spreadsheet used to justify layoffs or budget cuts. It's easy to reduce people to rows and columns, but doing so comes at the cost of understanding their real value, which can be far more complex than the math suggests.